And we try to keep them going. Ours are about 20 years old. They're starting to get the chestnut light. But lots of people all over the country keep planting these trees, hoping somebody will come up with a cure. So I've got some, nuts that you can plant right now. If anybody's interested, come see me.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Just for the workers Saturday night.
Yeah, we're gonna. Finished? What's happening? Mr. Matt,
Okay, tonight's program is ready to start, and it's going to be about the Great San Francisco earthquake, and the speaker is dimming the lights. So we welcome Chuck Kutscher as speaker tonight.
It's on. It's on.
Okay, I think we got it. If you can't hear me, let me know. I'll pick this thing up and we can use that. Have a preference? Better? Okay. Want to remind you about the meeting coming up next month, first Monday in November. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. The Mary Shelley and her group of singers call themselves Then Again, which is a very useful title. Yes?
It's Anne Shelley.
You're right. I was thinking of something else. Frankenstein or something. I'm not an English major. I don't belong to POEM like some of you folks do. I tried. Anne Shelley, correct. And the three women are just excellent singers. They put so much enthusiasm into it. And they asked us, I guess they asked you, Sandy, what decade would you like? And so you said,
The 50s.
the 50s, even though you weren't born yet, and you said, well, maybe you were. Okay. And so they are going to sing. They love all the music, but they want to preserve some of the older music, and so they are going to come and sing songs from the 50s. They wear dresses that are from the 50s, and they just do a wonderful job. Is it going to be a kind of a sing-along at some point?
We could make it that
We
way.
don't know. We can impose on them maybe. So we strongly recommend that you come. It's going to be a fun evening. In December, we have our usual a program where we have a meeting, annual meeting. We have a dinner. You bring a plate to share with people. And we've been starting that at 6, so it's more like dinner time. And so that's going to happen on the first Monday in December. Programs for next year are still in the formative stage. We've got a meeting coming up. We'll probably talk about that. But a lot of good things. If some of you people have something you'd like to hear, a particular kind of program, we can certainly work on that. Anyhow, tonight, as you remember, a couple of years ago, I think it was 3 years ago, we had a woman who was a ghost hunter, and that, I think, started all this. And we said, well, that fits. It's Halloween month, and we have a ghost hunter coming in to talk to us. So then the next year, 2 years ago, I volunteered to try to tell you a scary story, but true. Scary, but true. The Great Chicago Fire. And then, here we are again, 2 years later, I volunteered to talk about one of nature's great, terrible tragedies, really. The San Francisco earthquake and fire. And I want to tell you, there's a lot of information on this. It took me a long time to get on top of this subject matter. As far as I know, everything I'm going to tell you is true. But I got to tell you, that event lasted for about 3 days. And then the 4th day, they got some rain, and it stopped. But the disaster was just of mammoth proportions. And so many things were happening so fast that people wrote it down, or somebody wrote it down. We hope they got it right. So as far as I know, this is all true. What a story. It'd be real nice if you were. Okay. For you people that haven't been there, I strongly recommend a trip to San Francisco. This is the way it looks. There it is right there. It's like a finger sticking up into the bay and into the ocean. This is the bay behind you. This is the Pacific Ocean, and there's San Francisco. And if you look over here, this doesn't show up terribly well, but what we have is a street map. And as I read these books, they were talking about this street and that street. I had to spend a lot of time learning where these streets are. So if you want to go there and take me, I can be your guide. And we'll have a lot of fun. Basically, a couple of things here. This street is Van Ness Avenue, a very big thoroughfare in San Francisco. This street is Market Street. And if you live down here below Market Street or south of Market Street, they say you live in Soma, S-O-M-A, south of Market. The point is this. This is where the fire occurred. And so it looks like a good deal of the city was not affected by the fire. But this part was tremendously affected. And if you go south of Market Street down here, this is where they had a whole bunch of houses and boarding houses and a whole lot of wooden houses, and you can guess what's going to happen with them. Up here, they had a great many brick buildings, stone buildings, but you're going to see, just because it was brick or stone, it did not escape. Terrible, terrible damage. Here's Chinatown. That escaped for a while. And then somebody, in terms of doing their work, they thought if they blew up some buildings, they could control the fire. And they had some people who didn't know a lot about blowing up buildings and using dynamite and so forth. And somebody, somewhere close to Chinatown, decided they'd blow up a hotel, and they used some black powder, and whatever it is they did, the thing exploded, and a mattress caught fire, and sparks went up in the air, and they came down in Chinatown, and all of a sudden, about 9,000 Chinese people were out on the street trying to get away from all this. So this is the way it turned out. Well, if you're from that area, you know, yes.
There's a question about the microphone.
Want to
Yes.
set it up on there a minute? I want to go. I think it's on echo.
Oh, okay.
Just up here. I can't get down on my knees anymore. I got to put it up here.
Go right ahead. It does sound like it's echoing. Is that an echo?
That's where it is. Right there. Coming up right.
1, 2, is that better?
Better.
Oh, thank you, Al.
Okay.
Yeah, we believe that. You know you're sitting right on top of the San Andreas Fault. And it has had some earthquakes. Here's one in 1868. There were a couple of times in the 1890s when there were some minor quakes and it suffered some damage, but not too much. The thing we're talking about tonight occurred in 1906. Here's the way it looked before. Thriving metropolitan area. You see a lot of wagons running around. There's cars. Now, cars in 1906 were not, they're not very well advanced. And so they were there, but there were some and they would like to play things of the rich. Underneath, well, first of all, you see that track there is kind of slotted, and that slots for the cable cars. They had cable cars back then. They only ran 9 miles an hour, and people said, hey, we got to do something about that. And they said, we can have electrified streetcars, but you got to put wires up there, so it looks awful. And as they were arguing about that, the earthquake hit. Underneath this, miles and miles and miles of water pipes. They had water. They had running water. They had sewer pipes down there. They had gas lines down there. This is a major city. And for those people who were rich enough, this is something called the Palace Hotel. People like Enrico Caruso, the great singer, could go to the Palace Hotel. This is a covered over, beautiful covered over archway here, and you see the horses, they come right inside the building and pick you up. It must have been somebody with a pooper scooper running around keeping that place clean. But anyhow, if you went to the palace, you went to the best hotel that you could find. And then at 5:12 a.m. on Wednesday 18th in 1906, it hit. Most people probably were asleep in bed. The quake lasted about 65 to 75 minutes. It went something like this. Terrible, terrible shaking. Somebody said it's like if you take a terrier who catches a rat and he shakes the rat and shakes it. It was like somebody took San Francisco like that and shook it and shook it and shook it. And then it stopped for a few seconds, and then a second burst came in, and altogether probably no more than 75 minutes. Seconds rather. And if you look at that clock, you may wonder, you can see it's about 5:12. That didn't show too well. This happens to be the clock at Agnew's Insane Asylum. True. They used words like back then. They had homes for the feeble-minded. They had one building they called the, can't think of it right now, but they used words like this. This, unfortunately, was one of the first casualties, because in Agnew's Insane Asylum, what happened was the chimney fell over, or pardon me, the clock tower fell over, and it crushed about 119 people. Some of them were some of the inmates or patients, some were the so-called keepers or staff, and they were killed just about immediately. But here it is, 5:12 a.m., happening without warning, unless you happen to be an animal. They claimed the animals could feel the vibrations first. They got some minimal cues a second or two ahead of time, but after that, it happened. Within about a minute, all of these things happened. Let me take some of the stories here and tell you, and sort of give you a flavor of what's going on here. Jesse Cook was a policeman. He's standing on Washington Avenue looking down there. He's talking to one of the, down in the produce section, he's talking to one of the men selling produce, and he happens to look down Washington, and he can't believe what he's seeing, because it looks like waves. He thinks it's water. It looks like waves coming right in toward him. It's actually the pavement, up and down and up and down and up and down. He couldn't believe it, and so it hit. Chief Dennis Sullivan, fire chief for the entire city, he'd had a couple of fires that night, and so they were put out rather quickly. He got home, he got to bed about 3 o'clock in the morning, and about 5 o'clock, this hit. And so he opened the door to his wife's bedroom, he ran in and said, "Look, we got to do something, and something's happening." And the room began to shake, and he's holding on to the doorknob and anything he could hold on to. This firehouse, he's on the 3rd floor of this firehouse, is right next to the Hotel California. I should say, pardon me, that's a song, California Hotel. And it is right next to chimney, huge chimney. And with the quake, that chimney gave way. Now, during the earthquake and fire, something like 95% of all the chimneys in San Francisco in that area did fall apart and cause terrible things to happen. This one was way up in the air. The bricks came down 30 or 40 feet. They went through the roof of the firehouse, and they hit the floor where Dennis Sullivan and his wife were staying, and they knocked the floor out, and they just keep going down to the 1st floor. Strangely, she's barely hurt. She's in pretty good shape, but he is badly injured. Head injuries, punctured lungs, things like that. He only lives for about 4 days, and it is just a terrible, terrible thing. So the chief here of the fire department is now out of the picture, and he can't direct the great effort required. There's a farm nearby, and the cows and the milkers are suddenly just thrown to the floor. Well, the milkers get up, they try to get the cows up. The milkers are ready to go back to work, but the cows are not. They didn't get milk for about 3 or 4 days after that. That slowed them down. Let's take a look at some of the stories here. This is the example. Here's what Jesse Cook said. And he said, at first, there was what Officer Cook called a deep and terrible rumbling. Presumably the reason that he looked up, everything by now was fairly well illuminated by the gathering dawn, and so he looked uphill and could see quite clearly. The ocean itself was spilling what looked like immense waves of water down the street. It seemed as if a huge tide of buildings and pavement had been lifted up and was relentlessly bearing down on him. All the great commercial palaces of downtown. Couldn't believe it. Here's Officer Grady. He said, I thought I was gone when I saw the Phelan building suddenly lurch over Market Street. But it lurched back again. As it set back in its place, its foundations ripped and cracked and seemed to screech. The tall Call building, Call's a newspaper, the Call building rocked to and fro from north to south, while the Mutual Bank on the opposite side of Market Street near Gary similarly lurched and dipped over the thoroughfare. And the shake ended with a violent twist or rotary motion that caused the stone cornices of the building on the south side of Market Street west of Call, and therefore nearest to me, come crashing down on the sidewalk. This is the picture. All of a sudden, the world is moving, and for about a minute, a little more than a minute, it's kind of going crazy. I'm going to skip some of these. Let's get down to Caruso down here. There's a lot of stories about him. He was apparently kind of an eccentric kind of guy, but a great talent, a great voice. He went to bed about 3 o'clock. You know, he's an entertainer, he's an opera singer. They stay up late. 5 o'clock, the earthquake. They said he wakes up, he's crying. He's upset, he wants to get out of here. Well, one of the stories is, as he walks around, he starts saying, muttering, San Francisco is a hell of a town. A hell of a town, and I am never going to come back here. The fact is, he never did. Somebody said he got breakfast, did some other things we really don't know, but it was a very, very terrifying experience. This firehouse, you see, you don't believe it's a firehouse. This firehouse here is the one that Chief Sullivan was in when he was killed, and as you can see, there isn't much left of that. And as you look down the road, it looks like it was bombed out by our bombers in World War II. Down here, one of the people I didn't tell you about walked into the basement. This is a city hall. And apparently in San Francisco, like some other places, and I'm from Chicago, graft and corruption can creep in, and people can do things that are shoddy and poorly done, and that appears to be the case of City Hall. They said it took $6 million to build this. Today, that wouldn't seem like much. Back in 1906, that was a lot. It took 26 years to build this building, and a couple of shakes of the earth, and look at all of this. Columns falling down, cornices coming off, rocks falling down. They determined the building was very poorly built. Here's a strange thing. In the basement was something they called the Central Emergency Hospital. Now, you've got some hurt people. You'd like to get them down here, but that's no place. You can't even get in there anymore. Look at all those rocks around. And one of those men who went down there that particular morning, and suddenly the room began jumping around, the furniture's going back and forth, everything's swinging. He's grabbing whatever he can, trying to stand up. The whole building is shaking. And this particular building, strangely enough, they let it stand until about 1909, until they finally tore it down, even though it must have been a terrible mess by then. So City Hall is pretty well wiped out. All of a sudden, the Mayor Schmitz, is now putting together a committee. They're doing these things so quickly, it's unbelievable. A committee to direct the efforts here and try to do the right thing, and they don't know what it is. Here's Caruso. People did say that he came out of bed in his pajamas. That's not too hard to believe. He put on his fur coat, They said that he had a picture autographed by Teddy Roosevelt, the president, and there he went, whatever. Here he is, posing, I don't know. All we do know, he never came back. San Francisco never saw him again. Now, San Francisco has some areas where they built the land up. They maybe had a creek bed running through. They put a lot of dirt in, they packed it down. Now we run bulldozers and heavy machinery in there to make sure it's really packed down. I don't know what they did back then, but this is a building built on fill that was not heavily packed down. After the earthquake, look at that. Now, you can readily imagine if you got a door at your house you can't open very easily. What would happen if your house suddenly changes shape and looks like this? And not surprisingly, a lot of doors became stuck, and people had a lot of trouble getting out of them. Look at this. Looks like some drunken sailors here. Look at these guys. They're bent over. These frame houses, these are probably south of Market. Frame houses, looking pretty bad and not looking well at all. This is a bridge. Short time, probably before that picture was taken, one could cross over and back. That particular spot, the earth moved. Believe it or not, the earth moved 16 feet. What bridge can stand that? And so the bridge collapsed 16 feet. Now, by the way, you know, what's happening here is, I think most of you know, it is tectonic plates. That we were back in graduate school. I read my first article on this in Scientific American, and it said that there are plates under the ocean. And in the middle of the ocean, like the Pacific, there is a welling up of the earth and the rocks, and they push in two directions. If that's the case, then you've got this huge plate moving toward California. And that plate is going to move so much each year if it can. If it can. And that is what's causing all the disturbance. I think back in my graduate school days, people weren't sure about that at all. Now it appears to be the accepted the dogma on that those plates are there. They can move in different ways. They can go under like this. They can go sideways like this. And all the time causing some damage. And if you look at this map, that line there is along the west coast of North America, up through Alaska, up through the Aleutians. That's the fault line. Now, there are more lines. There are smaller lines and other ones, but that's the main, that's the big San Andreas Fault right there. People living, or used to live maybe in California, you think Schwarzenegger has trouble, you think you've got budgetary problems, yeah, all that. But you're also living on top of a fault line. And watch out. Watch out. If you don't believe that, this is a picture of the San Andreas Fault. In certain places, it looks very distinctive. And you can see how deep that is, like that. See how deep that is. And a very strong line. That's the problem. San Francisco is, here it is, right there. And the thinking has been that right the epicenter of this thing was over Daly City, right there, right near San Francisco. I guess there's still some argument about that, and you were talking about that. At any rate, the epicenter was so close that this turned out to be quite a tragedy. I think you can imagine why. But if you don't believe this is moving, I don't know exactly where this is, near Palmdale, California, but if you look at these rocks, what a beautiful pattern they make. And what the caption is saying is, this is the pattern you're getting when the rocks are coming together and moving, and maybe they don't move so much, but they bend. And as they bend and move, you get these incredible patterns here of the earth. Again, someplace in California. Tectonic plates. Now, look at this. If you can believe it, it says Valencia Hotel right there. And if you can believe it, this was once a 4-story hotel. it's not a real fancy one like the palace, but probably a good one. As you look at that, something is really missing, like 3 stories. And where did they put them? Well, you see all that debris and some around the back and all of that. And all of these people kind of standing and watching and trying to decide what to do. Apparently what happened was, as this came down, the 3 stories on the bottom kind of ruptured and fell apart. This came down, and the people could not easily get out of here, and something happened. Somehow, a water main was broken, and it began to flood this thing, and these people are now, some of them are drowning in there, as it turned out. This sounds incredible, but they were drowning in there, and if that wasn't bad enough, at some point later, the fire came by and essentially just burned these people up. They don't even know how many people perished here. They have no idea. Now, you can begin to see, this is like I said, underneath the road. There are gas lines. Underneath the road, there are water lines, and they can cause damage. Look at this. Look at the tremendous loss of property here. This building just kind of exploded, it looks like. It just kind of like the wood just kind of fell away, and these people are looking through it, trying to find, is anybody in there, trying to save anybody. Apparently some really heroic efforts here to try to save people who are in these buildings. And these guys really, they don't have any tools. They're working with their hands. They're working as hard. They aren't really sure maybe what to do. And so it goes. Well, here's another case of this. This was a rooming house. And probably people thought there are people trapped in there. They're trapped. And so what can we get them out? And notice this, all these men standing around trying to find something, way to help. They've all got suits on, people dressed up back in those days, you know, they all look pretty good. They've got their hats on, they wouldn't go out in public without hats on. I don't know if they got anybody out of this or not. Look at this, these people, dressed up to the hilt, and behind them, you can't tell very well from this picture, but there is behind them a terrible, terrible fire. At one point, the fire along Market Street stretched for about 1.5 miles. And people think, conservatively, the smoke went up into the air about 2 miles. 2 miles of smoke. Now, intense, somebody who wrote about this says there's every color you can imagine in those flames, which means there's every temperature imaginable, is what that means. They estimate, and I don't know how good the estimate is, they estimate that in places that fire could have been as hot as 2,000 degrees. And the reason they say that is because there are places where steel melted. Some of the frames of the buildings, some of the tracks of the cable cars, they just melted and bent. And so you got this tremendous fire. Think of this, all the smoke these guys are breathing in, plus the fact there isn't much breeze. That's good. That's good. There's so much breeze. But when you've got a fire so intense, as you can readily imagine, the heat goes up and it sucks in more air and the oxygen comes in, and so people are probably being deprived of oxygen to breathe to some degree. They've got the heat going on. And people who were there, and these pictures sort of bear this out, they all looked very quiet. You got to wonder, you know, how would we react in that setting? That terrible, terrible setting. And yet the people, they seem very calm. Nobody's screaming, nobody's running around, nobody's going nuts. In fact, when they talk, somebody said, they kind of whisper to each other. You know, they kind of whisper. When people saw the fire coming up the road and they're sitting in front of their house, and they see the fire coming up the road, they don't bother to move until it gets very close, then they pick up a suitcase or something and go over. It's unbelievable. Well, San Francisco knew about fires. They had some. Yeah, it rains in the winter, but other times maybe it's a little bit dry, and they knew about fires, and so they have established and trained a very efficient fire department. Here's state-of-the-art pumper. You can't see it very well yet, but it's a big boiler. and they keep the fire going at all times, and then they run to the fire, put the fuel in, and get it going and pump the water up into the building. So here is somebody responding. Now, right away they got a problem. Because they were kind of thinking, you know, there could be an emergency when the power goes out. These people had power. You're going to see that in just a minute. They had power, electricity, long before Fabius had electricity. Yeah. And the electricity could go out, so they had the alarm system in a building in Chinatown, and it had wet cells to power the alarm system, so in case the power went out, they still got power. The earthquake took those wet cells and threw them all on the floor and broke them. So they have no alarm system, but it doesn't matter. All you got to do is look out the window and see smoke rise, let's go there. And so a typical run is they go there, and a typical situation is somebody goes over, hooks up the hose of the hydrant, gets that big wrench, opens it up, and the guys with the hose brace themselves, getting ready for the water to rush in. Drip, drip, drip. So they try it again, do a different hydrant. What happened was almost all the hydrants in San Francisco, look at these are water mains that are simply broken up by the earthquake. So they had, the electrical system was out, the telephone system was out, the water system was gone. They've got to fight the fires as best they can. Doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. Here's again a place where they built this thing on top of not very strong soil, and it collapsed, as you can see in the earthquake. But if you look over here, this is a typical case. This was somebody's bed. It is a very good thing that he or she got up early that morning, because they weren't there. They weren't there when these big chimney blocks came down through the ceiling from the building next door. This could be total instant death, of course. They weren't there. 95% of all the chimneys in this area destroyed by the earthquake. It's probably hard to see a picture that is more devastation than this. Look at this. Here's a dead horse. Don't know how he died. There are many possibilities. He may have died from bricks hitting him and cornices dropping off of buildings and things like that. But the animal is quite dead. Look at the tremendous amount. The walls have collapsed. They've fallen off these buildings. Wagons have been destroyed by the falling rocks and bricks. And these guys look kind of casual, you know, like, let's chat. I don't know how to explain this, but so many people writing about this were amazed. These guys don't seem excited. Nobody's screaming. They just kind of chat. As time goes on, oh, here's some more of these drunken sailors here, kind of tipped over. Look at these ladies, they're all dressed up. They got their dresses on, they look nice, they got mostly, yeah, they've got hats on. You don't go out without a hat on. It wouldn't be right. My grandmother always wore a hat, no matter where she went, and she wasn't there in 1906. But 6 hours before this picture was taken, there was a performance here in the Majestic Theater. Suppose that quake had happened 6 hours before. 11 o'clock at night, we'll say, 10 o'clock at night. Think of how many people could have been killed right here. The roof caved in, seats destroyed there, a few maybe here, and the first floor, things are fine. 6 hours. Also, I think what you gotta realize is it's like they're taking, a lot of people had cameras in 1906. And they were taking pictures like crazy until their film ran out. And so we have, if you're really interested in this, you can look at this. This is a picture book of all this, and it's jam-packed with pictures of this. I had so many to draw upon. It was very difficult. Look here, a couple of guys kind of walking along, chatting, and the buildings are crumbling, and the smoke is rising, and all of that, whatever it is. Now, if we have any wine connoisseurs, this will make you very sad. This happens, we visited San Francisco, we saw some of the wineries, we saw some of the vineyards. We have friends who are real connoisseurs, and this happens to be the Sonoma Wine Company. but over the whole city of San Francisco, 15 million gallons of wine gone. 15 million gallons of good California wine left the planet. Notice also how this building is sort of falling down, that's for sure, but it seems to show some sign of fire. So let's talk about the fire here. Oh, this, all of a sudden, we've got thousands of people homeless. All of a sudden, we've got hundreds, maybe even thousands of people injured. What do you do with them? Where do you take them? Well, the hospital at City Hall, that couldn't go there anymore. City Hall was crumbling apart. And so they had this big auditorium near City Hall called Mechanics Pavilion. It's like a big barn, actually. And they got some doctors there, and they got some nurses there, and they began treating people there until this became in the line of in the line of the fire. This is the burned area. Doesn't look like too much there. Doesn't look like it's too big an area. This is the Presidio. It's like a big park area. It's also a kind of a military base of some sort. This is Golden Gate Park, and it doesn't show here, but in this area there are little parks, 2 or 3 block parks, squares they call them. And you're going to see some of these as they were taking people there to treat them. Here's a typical example. There's the fire engine. They've got the fire going. They're pumping water. Look at the extent of that fire. And you say, wait a minute. If all of the hydrants are dry, where's the water coming from? Well, 3 sources. One of them is many people, many buildings still had cisterns in San Francisco. And if the building had that, they could get the hose in the cistern and get some water that way. Number 2, they had a sewer system. And where there was water accumulating in the sewers, they could go down there and pump that out and put the fire out. Wouldn't smell too good probably, but it might put the fire out. And the other thing, if it's close enough to the water, they could pump in salt water and use that to put the fire out with. So in some cases, they did. Now bear in mind, this is going on for 3 days. And these poor firemen, they're reaching the point of just about total exhaustion. There was one point, they had to go up a little hill with that device there, and with the horses, go up a little hill to get to the fire. And the horses simply couldn't do it. They were exhausted. And so some of the men came out of the crowd and grabbed a hold of this thing and pulled it up the hill. You know, a lot of people helping out here. In a few cases, the chimney stayed and the house disappeared. But that wasn't very often. Usually it's the other way around. Now, this gets interesting. You see these guys running into the building? You see it looks like there's smoke and probably some fire. There's a wall there, looks like maybe about to cave in. All this is going on, and those guys are hauling explosives into the building. Some of them, they know what they're doing, and a lot of them have not a clue, but they're going to help. So some of these guys, yeah, they got blown up. They did things that were very harmful. They blow the building up. Now, quite often they just blow the windows out. But if they want to really get rid of it, they go in there and pour some kerosene on the floor and then try to blow the building up. The idea was we're going to burn this building in a controlled burn, and then we'll be able to starve the fire because it won't have any fuel. Well, people are still arguing this point, but they don't think these guys did any good. And I'm just amazed more of them weren't killed because they didn't always know what they were doing, but they did blow up a lot of buildings. So look at, imagine what you got now. As you're in San Francisco, you hear these explosives going off, buildings blowing up. It's like cannonading. You smell the smoke. It's terrible. These guys are putting out fires with sewer water. There is this probably lack of oxygen. It's all going into the fires, these enormous fires and so forth. Not a very pleasant place to be. And look at these guys. They're business owners, and they're trying to save some of the records. Boy, if the building looks like that, you probably haven't saved very many of the records. There was a boatman, his name was Tom Conway, and he had a series of barge-like boats. And luckily for him, 2 days before the earthquake, luckily for him, he got a shipment of fuel, and these things were, I guess, I don't know, gasoline or diesel propelled. And so he got a lot of jobs. People wanted to get out of San Francisco, and he'd take them across to Oakland or someplace else. Got a lot of jobs that way. One of the banks hired him, and they put on the barge a huge number of sacks, and they said, go out there into the bay and just stay there for a while. And he suspected, he didn't peek, he suspected that those bags were full of money, but he didn't look. He didn't want to know. And they probably were. There was a man, his first name was Giannini, and he ran a small bank. It was called the Bank of Italy. And he put into his wagon all the cash and records he could and took it away from the earthquake and fire area. It worked. He was able to start a new bank in a different location. He then named it Bank of America. And it became one of the biggest banks in the country eventually. Somebody else was trying to save a bunch of bonds. They put them in wheelbarrows and they're wheeling them down the street. These are things that are not registered, and people could have taken them and used them as good as cash, but they didn't. There really wasn't much violence and stealing and so forth in this area. Things were pretty much under control, and here's a guy here named Lafler, Henry Lafler. He's sitting here at his makeshift office. He's typing the story of all this, and he submits an article to McClure's magazine, and he calls it My 60 Hours Without Sleep. Now, if you're reading the fine print, what may stop you is, why is he sitting here among shallow graves? You may wonder about that. Well, think about this. In the Hall of Justice, as they called it, police worked there, the coroner worked there, the morgue was there, and all of a sudden the earthquake hits. They know they've got to get out of there. They took the prisoners, some of them took to Alcatraz, and they were safe there. What do you do with the dead bodies in the morgue? If they just took them out and stacked them up, that's not nice. They buried him. So he's in this area where they buried a whole bunch of guys in shallow graves, and I don't know what happened to them afterwards. Look at O'Farrell Street. This is one of the examples of extreme devastation. Just almost everything is gone. Let me say something about architecture. 1906 was about an area of transition. Before that time, most of the buildings built of masonry were built with very wide foundations if they had several stories, very, very wide foundations. And the reason was because all the bricks and stones you stack up there have got to be supported by this foundation, and it's got to be pretty big. I think when you see pictures like this, that it probably indicates that's the way those buildings were built. But around 1906, they first began to use steel frames. Actually, it started before that. They make a steel frame in the building, and then once you do that, the steel adds all the strength. You don't have to have a big wide wall at the bottom. The wall of that building can be glass, because it barely weight. The steel bears all the weight, and they were just shifting over at about that time. I think that's what's going on here. How I wish that were in color, because I think you would see in those burning buildings some really intense color. Because the caption reads, as about 3 minutes after this picture was taken, minutes after that picture was taken, those buildings disappeared. They're gone. They're all on the floor. Look at this building. This is the Call building, I believe. And it's burning in a typical fashion. If they catch fire at the top, the fire tends to burn its way down. And this floor gets very hot. The windows pop out. All the combustible stuff burns. The next floor, it gets hot. The windows pop out. Combustible stuff burns until it gets down to the bottom. And I believe it took about an hour or so to get from top to bottom of that building to give you some idea how tremendously fast all this stuff was going. You see, they did have electrical. And that probably contributed to the fires. Because the gas line lines were ruptured along with the water lines. And so you've got gas oozing out all over the place. Sooner or later, you're going to have some poles dropping down. Still hot, maybe electrical current still going through there. They're hissing and sputtering and all of that. And pretty soon that combines with the gas. You got an explosion. People had fuel stored around it here and there. Those things eventually leaked out, became combustible, and so forth. So all kinds of ways here. Somebody just struck a spark maybe with a couple of rocks, and you've got gas coming out. It's like when you take your barbecue and light it after you didn't quite do the right thing with the valves, and all of a sudden you got singed eyebrows. It almost happened to me recently. That's why I know it. Palace Hotel. Well, this was sad. This beautiful, gorgeous masterpiece. But if you look up there, people said, hey, the flag is still flying. As long as the flag, they said, on the Palace Hotel is flying, everything is not lost. But look at the next one. The smoke, the fire, and the flag is gone. And indeed, the Palace Hotel was gone as well. One of the great architectural masterpieces of San Francisco is gone. Oh, think about this. Suppose you're in this situation, and all of a sudden you've got to leave and grab whatever is valuable to you. What would you grab? What would you take? I'd read years ago that some people took bird cages and things like that, which doesn't sound too logical. But look at this. There's a number of steamer trunks in here, and a lot of people took them. What they had in the steamer trunk, often not even very much, but there they are. Apparently people thought it'd be good to have something to sleep on, so they took mattresses, and there were some of those. And there were actually people who said, man, I worked so hard for this, I'm not going to leave it behind, and tried to take a piano with them as they fled. If you can imagine a guy with this huge flame behind him, and maybe the earth is showing a few aftershocks, and he's going along pushing a piano, I don't think that's going to work out too well. But that's the decision. They had to make decisions. And this picture, a man named Arnold Genth, I don't know if that's right, or it's Genthe, or something like that, I don't know. But he is considered to be one of the fathers of photographic journalism, one of the very stars of his generation. Here he was, San Francisco, the earthquake hits, the fire hits, and he has no camera. And so he knows a dealer, a camera dealer, and he goes to this man, he says, I need a camera, can you loan me a camera? And the guy says, look, I can see the fire coming down the road, take anything you want, it's all going to turn to scrap in just a short time, take whatever you want. So he picked up a Brownie, or a Kodak camera rather, and he took pictures, and this is said to be one of the best news pictures ever, one of the 10 best. Look at this, the fire down here, the smoke rising 2 miles, maybe. All these people kind of sitting around looking at it as though it's a show of some sort, you know? Look at this wall just popped right out, the bricks are lying in the street, and look at these guys. They got chairs. It's like, hey, this doesn't happen very often. Let's get a good look at this. And here's these guys here sitting there with the chairs, and they're looking down and everything. It's like, again, nobody seems excited. Nobody seems crazy. They're just sort of watching everything happen. This is a cable car. There's a slot right down the middle. The two tracks don't show very well, but that's where it was. And the day before, this all happened on Wednesday, the day before, Tuesday, if you needed to move something, you could hire these guys and pay them $1, that should say $2, not $5, $1 or $2, and they'd be happy, and you'd be happy, and they could move things. But boy, on Wednesday, you try to hire these guys, it's like $50 to $75. Now, got a lot of wealthy people, they forked over $75, they've got things moved, and where are you going to go? This guy looks pretty prosperous, sees a lot of stuff here. He's in one of those parks, or one of those squares, deciding what to happen, where he's going to go next. Don't know. There he is. Look at that big steamer trunk. How you going to move that? Boy, but look at that. She's got her hat on. She's looking great. There's another steamer truck. Looks like a huge yard sale, but they're not going to go anywhere. Well, that's more stuff. And this, the caption said, if you had anything with wheels on, it was really valuable. People would take steamer trunks and turn them over and tack on roller skates to get something on wheels and try to wheel these steamer trunks down the street. You gotta wonder, this young boy, what is he thinking? What's he making of all this? He must be scared. He must be afraid. Here's one of his wagons, it looks like. They're piling stuff on there. They're looking around. Look at, somebody thought they could move a dresser. Wow. And finally, they start to move. They went different directions. These people, I think, were moving toward the Presidio, which is up in the northwest corner. And it's a good place to go. It's kind of a park. It's full of trees. There were not buildings there to fall down, especially. Others moved to what they call the Golden Gate Park, a very large park, and it gets some space, and you're not going to have a building fall on you and so forth. But here they are, marching along. Now they look a lot more serious. If you got a carriage, you take it. If you got to walk, you do that. Look at these folks. They're trying to get away now. They're trying to go somewhere. And then the newspapers come out. People shot down by soldiers in the street of San Francisco. The mayor did issue an order. If you're a policeman, if you see somebody looting, shoot them. The coroner reported that there were only a couple of cases of people with gunshots to the head. This didn't happen very often. Apparently that the order was kept in San Francisco in spite of all these terrible things happening. So looting must have been kept down to a very small and a very small number of times. Oh, here these people are going for the Presidio. I guess the other folks are going to Golden Gate. There they are. Think about this. If you were these people, what would you be thinking? Would you be thinking, this is a hell of a town. I am getting out of here. I don't care where. I'll go to Iowa. I don't care. Strangely, most people did not think that. And let me show you what I mean. Let's skip that one. Here's some more devastation. This happens to be Union Square, but look in the back. This was a building under construction using this new steel framework that I was talking about. So it was gradually coming into being. And San Francisco, of course, like many large cities now, but San Francisco has very stringent building codes. You've got to build something that you can prove is going to withstand earthquakes. And that has made building in San Francisco very expensive. If you look at what it costs to live different places, we are in heaven right here, really. If you look at the most expensive places to live, you probably guess number one, New York City. Number two is usually San Francisco today. And I think part of it is the lack of land. The land is limited. Part of it is the very stringent building codes they didn't have back in 1906. Oh, some people made a lot of this picture. You can't see this very well, but these two girls, young women posing for the camera, they look like they're smiling, if you have a better picture. And what that seems to say to people is they're kind of oblivious. Behind them, smoke rising up maybe 2 miles up in the air, buildings burning down, guys with dynamite, dynamiting buildings, and these girls are happily posing for the camera, maybe even trying to impress these guys who are sitting there looking at them, who knows? Who knows? Oh, if you go to your bank to take some money out, you can be sure it was guarded. This happens to be the police were using this bank for an office after the bank closed, but at any rate, these guys here were the bank guards, so your money was well protected. Just don't try to steal or anything, but they kept that bank in good shape, but there must have been so many other banks, as you can see, that had a terrible time. This, one of Geth's photographs, he looked out the window, we got a look at this part of the city. And they said the next day, if he came back, I don't know if he did, but the next day, everything you see in that picture was gone. That is how devastating the fire was. If you had an automobile, wonderful. Boy, they loved it. Help people get around, take messages, take sick people away, and so forth. There's some of the rails that are kind of twisted and so forth. And again, they're estimating, some people estimate fire may have been as hot as 2,000 degrees centigrade, or not centigrade, Fahrenheit. I don't know. If you see Ruth Hotel, and you can ask her if she had any relatives who were in the whiskey business. Some people gave this thing a kind of theological tinge and said, why is God doing this to all of us good people? And my house burns down, and I get injured, and beams fall on me, but the hotel and whiskey warehouse over here is untouched. And these are the bad guys because they didn't have whiskey. So you can ask her if she had some relatives who were warehousing whiskey back in those days. At any rate, they got out of this pretty well. But after this, Saturday night, remember it began on Wednesday. Saturday night, the rains came and pretty well took care of the fire. And then they started to build back. These guys set up a butcher shop here, and they're selling. Hopefully people have some money. They're selling meat. By the way, other areas, Los Angeles was extremely good about this. They sent food to the people of San Francisco, carloads or train loads full of it. They sent doctors and nurses to San Francisco. They were very, very good and very, very helpful. From here you see, from May to October, they're selling meals here. Look at all these people. They've got something like 200,000 homeless people. How can anyone feed 200,000 homeless people? Now, they charge them, 15 cents if they've got it. If they don't have it, I don't know what they did, but 15 cents. And this went on until October, and by October, this all happened in April, by October they had rebuilt a lot of these buildings. It's just really hard to believe. This is the way the landscape looked in one part of San Francisco in April after all this cooled down. 3 years later, look at it. 3 years later, look at it. I don't know. I think I would have been the person to say, I am out of here. I have had enough of this. Not these people. They stayed, they built, they came back. Well, you may be wondering how we got those prints. In 1906, airplanes were not so good, Some guy had a patent on this. And that is, you got a lot of box kites up here. What he called a leap box kite. And up this far, 800 feet off the ground, he stations a camera, and the guy on the ground has some way to control that camera and take those pictures. And so that's why you got those pictures. That there was no reliable airplane in 1906. The Wright brothers had flown, but not many other people had, and they were not letting other people see the plane and so forth. They were filing patents, but they started over again. And all that metal, they collected it, and they refined it, and they reused it, and they made stuff out of it as the city is growing up again. Again, look at this. It looks like Dresden, Germany during World War II after we bombed it. It almost looks like Hiroshima or Nagasaki, but they got the roads cleared. And they're running around there, and they've got a whole lot of rebuilding to do. This I love. Probably can't read the fine print. Let me try to read it for you. It says, property for lease will improve to suit tenant. If I were the tenant, I would say there's a lot of things of which I don't approve in this scene here. But look at this mess, and the guy is saying, I think I can find somebody who wants to use this again. And just like it's the regular thing, he says, property for lease will improve to suit the tenant. Well, with optimism. Now, the mayor had said other things. The mayor said you can't cook inside because, I didn't mention this, but I forgot this. You can't cook inside. There's a little place called Hayes Valley in San Francisco. And the story goes that on the first day of the earthquake, her house was not too badly hurt. Yeah, it got a few cracks, plaster came down off the ceiling, a couple broken windows, but not too bad. So she says, you know, let's have breakfast. So she lights up her stove to cook breakfast. And whatever happened is not clear. Whatever happened, that fire caught the wall on fire. It jumped to other buildings, and pretty soon that was the biggest blaze that San Francisco had. And because she was fixing breakfast, they called it the ham and eggs blaze. That's the official designation, the ham and eggs blaze. Well, the mayor said, no one had one of that anymore. And so you got to cook outside. So here's somebody with probably a wood stove and these lasers staying around cooking. The mayor also said you cannot have don't use indoor plumbing, because at that time they didn't have any water. So people were taught how to dig latrines and stuff like that. So these guys got a real education here out of all this. Let's wrap it up. What happened? The total, the bottom line of the quake and the fire, 95% of all chimneys down. 490 ravaged blocks. 490 blocks. And you saw, when we talk about ravaged, they were really ravaged. 30 schools destroyed. 80 churches destroyed. One of them was the St. Ignatius Church and Seminary. Multi-million-dollar complex, uninsured. It took them decades to get over that problem. The entire business section of San Francisco wiped out. 250,000 homes are gone. The fire covered over 2,800 acres. Well, how many are dead? We don't know, for two reasons. Some of the bodies simply burned up. That's one thing. The second thing is the city of San Francisco didn't want to make the death count too high because it would then drive away money that they needed to rebuild. And so they probably tamped it down. But the thinking now is at least 500. That's like the official estimate. Most people think it ran to about 3,000. People have said this fire is the greatest conflagration in human history. It's bigger than Chicago, it's bigger than the London fire of 1666. It's the biggest fire in human history. A few more things about this. Some things are good. Some of the homes were spared, 50,000 homes. The waterfront was spared. At the last minute, it was a tight thing. They almost lost it, but they controlled the flames and the waterfront was saved. Congress, believe it or not, quickly, did something quickly. Congress gave them $1 million. They're probably still complaining about that. We said the rest of this, and one of the things, the estimate, if there had not been a fire, if the gas lines had not ruptured, the damage would only be about 3 to 10% of what actually happened. Just the quake alone caused that much damage. The rest of it was caused by fire, and over 28,000 buildings destroyed. So you've seen it, you've been there, you've heard the story. Are you scared? Really?
I'd like to tell the other people I have studied the same thing at one time, and I can't tell you how good a presentation Chuck gave. I'm absolutely impressed. Thank you.
I want to correct something. You lived there, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Somewhere.
My son lives out there.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Well, I'm wondering if there was any serious discussion by political groups or whatever about should we rebuild on this place where such an earthquake can occur?
I would have suggested that. As far as everything I've read, nothing suggests that. There was never And you saw these guys are springing right back into action. They're leasing property, they're setting up stores. There was one I didn't show you. There was maybe I did, but somebody had a restaurant right there out there, and since you can't cook inside, the restaurant's outside, they just came right back. And after the Chicago fire that I reported on a couple of years ago, the same thing, that they were there. One guy set up a real estate agency all of a sudden in Chicago. I'm sure that probably happened here too. Yeah, I don't know. Now, this, if I were living there now, this is 100 years ago we're talking about, more than that, 103 years ago. Wouldn't you think that plate is about to move again? Isn't it about due?
How much did they know about, the earthquakes and the tectonics then, though?
I don't think he knew anything about plate tectonics. Yeah, I guess they didn't know anything, really. Yeah, it's,
One of the things is when you live in Southern California, I live in San Diego, the thing is down there, but you don't keep it on your mind all the time. I was in the military at the time, and so we did have specific things to do with that in case, something happened. I woke up one morning thinking that one of my friends was kicking my bed to get me out of bed, and I looked over the the light went like this, and I got up and looked out. Sort of my first experience with that. The ground's going like this.
we did have a little earthquake, was it 20 years ago here in Vegas? And Irene and I slept right through it, and missed the whole darn thing, so we may have to go 100 years or more to get another one.
There are a couple of fault lines, though. There's one that runs
Yes.
through the middle of the country. Irene probably knows about the Saint, what is it, Saint?
Madrid?
Yeah.
The new Madrid
Saint,
fault?
yeah, New Madrid.
Yeah, there is, the new Madrid runs sort of along Mississippi near Missouri, and there was, 1812 or something like that? There was just a terrible, terrible earthquake there. It actually changed the course of the Mississippi River, at least for a time. It was just a terrible, terrible thing. So yeah, that's there.
One that happened here, which boy, my youngest son was in the bathtub right now. He said, "What's going on?" There's water.
But anyhow, we missed the big one. That was 1906. A big one. Well, folks, we got great refreshments over here. Sandy's been working, Irene's been working.